Welcome, everybody, to the Victory Television Network. I'm Happy Caldwell, and I want to thank you for joining me for today's edition of Arkansas Alive. All week long, we're going to be talking about saving our cities. I'm having that book that I wrote several years ago republished, and it'll be out maybe in a few weeks or maybe a month or so. I'll tell you how you can get your copy. If we're going to see worldwide revival, everybody's going to have to enter in, and they're going to have to take their cities for God. So stay tuned. Arkansas Alive starts right now. In the scriptures, the Bible tells us that God built two cities. He built Eden, and he built the New Jerusalem. John tells us in Revelation that the city of Jerusalem, he has already seen the holy city. It exists now. The city of Eden was excavated in 1918, believe it or not, by the British. Archaeologists uncovered what biblically defined the city of Eden. Now, many times in the Bible, we read, because of the language in Genesis 2, we read about the Garden of Eden. But I want to call your attention to it is the Garden of Eden. Eden was not a garden. Eden was a city. And you can read about it in Haley's Bible commentary. Or if you want to go to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England, you can see it. That's right. It had underground sewer systems. It had libraries. They have on display the gold that the women wore. These people were not cave dwellers, as many have supposed. These were cities, and God built the cities. So that makes cities important to God, and it should make them important to us. And as I discovered this early on in the ministry, God is a God of cities. The word city is defined as an organized population center, and God loves cities. Did you know that some of the cities in America are named spiritually? Just think of the city of Los Angeles, city of angels. Just think of Corpus Christi, Texas, the body of Christ. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. All of these cities have roots into God's plan for man. I jokingly say when I talk to other churches or conferences, and I'm introduced as Pastor Happy Caldwell from Little Rock, Arkansas, I always say that's where Jesus is building his church. He told the disciples, upon this little rock, I will build my church. Some of them laugh, some of them don't. Little Rock, Petit Rocher, the city of God, and God is building his church here. Now, everybody should know the origin of their city. I don't care whether it's Jonesboro or Hot Springs or Hooterville or wherever you live, need to know the origin of your city. And I guarantee you, if you can trace it far enough back, you'll find that God was involved in that city and the building of it and the purpose of it one way or another. Okay, let's read Genesis chapter 2, and then I'll tell you why it's important that you understand about saving your city. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 8. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden. He built Eden. He built the city of Eden, but he planted a garden outside of Eden, east of Eden. I think Hollywood feebly attempted to make some movie by that title. And there he put the man whom he had formed. And you know the rest of the story. All right, let's go over to Revelation chapter 21. I like to say it this way. God began with a city, and he ends with a city. In Revelation 21, and let's look at verse 2. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. So the New Jerusalem and the city of Eden were both built by God. Eden was the first city, and the New Jerusalem is the last city. Now, your city may fit somewhere in this progression. God built the first city. Eden means a city of beginnings. It means a city of light, delight, peace. Jerusalem, city of peace. At one time, in my notes, and I don't recall where they are, I would read them to you today. It'd be nice if I had them. At one time, I had done a study on all of the trees that were in the garden, what God intended for man, and what was representative in that garden. And botany, the study of plants, and all the study of growing things and roots of things, there were so many different species of plants and trees in the garden. Because if you'll remember, God told Adam, he said, I have given you every herb-bearing seed. That's in Genesis chapter 1, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat or for provision. I know sometimes vegetarians, and I don't mean to insult you or anger you, but vegetarianism as a doctrine is unscriptural. It's actually a doctrine of devils, is what Timothy calls it. The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy, and he said there are doctrines of devils. Not to eat meat as a matter of doctrine. Doesn't mean you can't enjoy a meatless diet or vegetarian diet. Doesn't mean that it's sin, but if you teach it as a doctrine, he said it is. You can't teach these things as doctrines from God, because God said, I have blessed and cleansed everything for you to eat. Right here, he tells us that the reason that he gave us a dominion over all of his creation, including every herb-bearing seed or every seeding seed, it says he gave it to us for provision, to sustain us. He gave it to us so we could replant. He gave it to us so we could grow. And then he told Adam, he said, I want you to till this garden, and I want you to bless it, and I want you to keep it. It's all in the creation. It's all in the original purpose for God. When he created the earth, he created it for man. He created man for himself, but he created the earth for man. If you have never been to Lexington, Kentucky, and gone on the ark, Noah's ark, an exact replica, exact dimensions from the Bible, it's awesome. If you've never been there, I'd recommend that you go. And if your children are old enough to understand and appreciate that kind of thing, I'd take my children too. There's some Baptist brothers that have built this thing. Jeannie and I and our son Ronnie and his wife, we all went to tour it several years ago. On that ark, it's exactly the way God described it in the scriptures. In fact, up on the third level, the third deck, there was one window, And underneath that window was what you would call today, I think, a flower box. And I mean, it wasn't tiny, it was huge because the ark was huge. And in that flower box or that planter, they had planted all kinds of seeds that they had gathered and brought on the ark. Now they had all the animals, and Noah's family took care of the animals and fed them and cleaned up after them. That's another thing that I question. I guess that's right brain, left brain, the man. I want to know how they got rid of the waste. And I found out they had a diagram of the ark and showed how Noah designed it was designed on the principle, now don't laugh at me here, of a flushing toilet. It was on the side of the ark, and when they needed to get rid of the waste, whether it was animal waste or human waste, they would take it in these wheelbarrows, go up to the third level, and dump it in this big, so it looked like a silo, and the motion of the ship and the water would come up and flush it out of the ship. Noah and his family had a living space up on the third level. It was beautiful, and they studied and they prayed there, and they grew any food that they needed. God said, I give you seed, and they used it to replant. When the flood subsided and there was bare land, they had all of that they had been working on, and they planted it to replant the earth after the flood. Of course, the animals survived. The animals went out and they multiplied and they replenished the earth. And so God's purpose was manifested. And I was so blessed because they had planted some little seeds of lettuce and stuff like that in this huge flower box, I call it. And you could see them coming up. I thought, because I wondered, what did they eat? And on the entry level of the ark, they had all of these huge water pitchers where they carried as much water as they could, fresh water. And then they also had grain bins where they had stored up food for the animals. It was very amazing, and it was a genius. Of course, God designed it. God told Noah what to do. Now, you remember why that God flooded the earth. It says that the man's thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. And it grieved God in his heart that he had made man, and man had become such a degenerate. And God said, I'm going to flood the earth, and I'm going to start over again. God did this a couple of times. He told Moses one time, he was fed up with the people worshiping idols and all that kind of stuff. He said, get out of my way. I'm going to kill all these people and start over with you. And Moses rebuked him and said, no, you can't. You have a covenant with them. But this was before Moses. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And God chose Noah and his family, 8 souls, to ride that ark until, and there was the same thing going on in that day. The people that built the ark did a masterful job. They have videos showing you what was going on outside the ark on the earth while Noah and his family were riding the ark above the flood. Of course, everybody died. Everything died after the flood came. But it was chaos. It was anarchy. It was moral decay. It was idol worship, sacrifice, all kinds of evil and ungodly things were going on. Actually, it says God was grieved in his heart because he had created man in his image and likeness, but man, after the fall, after Adam's transgression, man had become a depraved human being. And so God said, I'm going to flood the earth. I'm going to get rid of all of this, and I'm going to give Noah and his family grace, and 8 people are going to refurbish and replenish the earth. So all of that took place in the beginning. But God created Eden for a pattern, for a model. And like I say, you can read all of this information in Haley's Bible Commentary, and you can read about the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, where they excavated the city of Eden. Now, I've been to the British Museum in London, where they have excavated and on display the city of the Ur of the Chaldees. That was where Abraham came from. In fact, Abraham and Noah lived not too far from each other. The Ur of the Chaldees, Noah was from Farah, or Farah, F-A-R-A-H. And these guys were on seaport cities coming up from the Persian Gulf, from the mouth of the Tigris and Euphrates River, the center of civilization at that time. And so these people, you hear a lot of history, they call it history. It's secularism, and they try to, get you to believe that man evolved from a monkey, a tadpole, an ape, or whatever, and they dwelt in caves and so forth. No, these people were created by God, and they lived in cities. The Ur of the Chaldees, that's in the British Museum in London, you can see the gold that the women wore, the necklaces, the writings. I mean, these were wealthy, educated people. And they had libraries. They had underground sewer systems. These were achievements. Even today, I've been in third world countries where they had no sewer system at all. I remember one time I was preaching in a church in Sri Lanka, which used to be at the little teardrop nation at the foot of India. And I went out to ask the pastor where the bathrooms were, the restroom, because it was me and Jeannie and a couple of other people. And the ladies needed to use the restroom, and I asked them where the restroom was. Now, this church was actually just a place of ground, a piece of ground in between two buildings that they had just built a roof over. Like if you live in a neighborhood and there's 10, 12 feet between your house and your neighbor's house, and you'd go and build a roof over that in between, that was the church. It was just bare ground that was not being used in between two buildings, so they just built a roof, and that was their church. And when we asked him where the bathrooms were, he said, come see. He went out to the back, and there was a hole in the ground. That was it. That was the bathroom. So there are a lot of third world countries that still are very primitive today, but not so in Eden. Eden was an industrial city. Ur of the Chaldees was an industrial city. And God built these cities. And you're going to see in a minute that, or say in a minute, that this week you'll probably see, that there were men associated with each city. In fact, I'll go ahead and just seed you with this. It was customary in the beginning days to always have a righteous leader, a man of righteousness, associated with each city. And that's how they called people. You can read it in the New Testament. Jesus of Nazareth, always associating a man with a city. Jesus of Nazareth. Saul of Tarsus. Who do you think is linked to the city of Nineveh? Jonah. What comes to mind when I mention to you Oral Roberts of Tulsa, Oklahoma? Billy Graham of Minneapolis. Billy Graham of North Carolina. Every man, significant, righteous man, was linked with a city. And that's how they identified each other. Saul of Tarsus, Jesus of Nazareth. Wherever you live, there's probably some distinguishable, notable difference or individual What is your town named after? I love to drive across the country, and you drive through these little cities, and you'll see little hamlets, little communities, and they're named after the founder. Go through Arkansas. We've got some real neat cities, and you can find out if you study how these cities got their name. And I just am trying to show you that if we as believers are going to save our cities, and that's the way we're going to do it, is each individual in their city take authority over the city, take ownership, take the initiative to get involved in their city. When we started our church, we had a billboard campaign and a bumper sticker campaign where we were proclaiming Jesus is Lord over Little Rock. And we had a big billboard sign all over the city, several billboards that just simply said, it was a blue with a banner, and it just said, Jesus is Lord over Little Rock. And then we followed it up with bumper stickers that we handed out to all of our church members, and they put it on the bumper of their card, and it was the same as the billboard, and it just was red, white, and blue, and said, Jesus is Lord over Little Rock. There were people that saw those billboards and saw those bumper stickers that were imprinted with a statement of faith, a philosophy. It literally changed the atmosphere in our city. We were proclaiming Jesus is Lord over Little Rock. And when we had celebrated many years in ministry here in our city, we had little lapel pins made. Jesus is Lord over Little Rock. Gave it to all the church members that had been here 25 years, I think, at that time. So we were trying to imprint and impact our city and our church and church people to realize that God is a God of cities, and cities are important to God. He created and built the first one, and He has already created and built the last one. We hadn't seen it yet, but John saw it. He saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, and it's just an amazing thing that we need to know about if we're going to save our cities. Okay, let's go to Genesis 4:17, and I think you're going to see a pattern here. Genesis chapter 4, and let's look at verse 17. It says, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he builded a city. Wow. Now we see men are building cities. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. So here we see man. Here's Cain. He built the first man-made city. And so the pattern continued. God built Eden. Here's a man building the first man-made city. Let's go back, and this is really interesting to me. Let's go back to Genesis 10, or let's go forward to Genesis 10 and follow through with this revelation. Origin of cities, Genesis 10, and let's look at verse 11. Genesis 10:11. And out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh, and the city Rehoboth and Calah. Now here we see the original builder of Nineveh. The Bible doesn't teach that Jonah built Nineveh. It says that Asher, Asshur, that's one of the Hebrew names. It actually is my name in Hebrew, happy, blessed, fortunate. So here we see that Asher builded Nineveh. Now let's go over to verse 32. Genesis 10, 11, and verse 32. These are the families of the sons of Noah after their generation in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. So Noah and his family dispersed throughout all of the earth, and they began to build cities. Now, it was very important that you understand these are not just every man, but these are righteous men. These are people that were anointed and commissioned by God. Go over to 2 Peter. Let's go over to 2 Peter, and let's look at chapter 2 and verse 4. I don't think we're almost out of time, but I want to read this to you, and then we'll pick this up here tomorrow. Let's go to 2 Peter, and this is significant, so it's worth studying. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains and darkness to be reserved to judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness. Now, tomorrow we're going to look at the genealogy and show you that Noah, now you got to read this correctly, it says Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness. But if you look at the genealogy, Noah was not the eighth person in the earth, in the world, from Adam. He was not the eighth person, but he was the eighth preacher of righteousness that identifies him in that lineage of righteous men that built cities. I'll join you tomorrow, and I'd like to see you here. Remember, Jesus is Lord over Arkansas, and where you're watching, too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on X at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.